Welcome to the Etsy Conversations podcast, featuring inspiring interviews with Etsy shop owners, hosted by Ijama Elazu.
Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of the Etsy Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Ijama, and I thank you for joining me for another episode. This week, my guest is Bree, and Bree runs the Etsy shop Ginger and Judy, and I'm really excited to have her on because she sells vintage items and upcycled items, and I've been wanting to talk to a seller of vintage clothing and vintage goods. So, Bree, I'm really excited to have you on. Thank you for being my guest, and welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be on the podcast that I listen to. It's such a neat feeling.
Oh, thank you. So before we start, can you just tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. I run a vintage boutique online on Etsy. I kind of a self-described DIYer of sorts, but I'm a designer, curator. I'm also a DJ, and I sell at local markets as well.
Now, how did you get into DJing?
Well, I actually got into DJing through a boyfriend who taught me. I was really interested in DJing, but actually what it came from was I had a shop. I had an indie fashion boutique in Milwaukee, and it closed, and my world kind of fell apart, and I needed something else. So it was really neat to just go from kind of one creative thing to something totally different. And that was about 4 years ago. And then I kind of got into fashion DJing a little bit. I was playing at Nordstrom and Neiman Marcus and doing these so that was really fun. And I'm on a little bit of a hiatus right now, but it's something I feel like I can always go back to for sure. But
so yeah. Is that, do they call that fashion DJing, like when you play at Nordstrom or those high-end stores?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of, it's something if you kind of, you know how you can just look up an Instagram tag to find out if this is a real thing?
Yeah.
There are people out there who are more geared towards fashion events, so it's something I want to get back into even more. But yeah, because there's a need for and you know there's not a lot of women DJs, unfortunately. I would like to see it expand. Yeah. But so I was doing kind of fashion shows and in-store events, and I've also DJ'd like local fashion shows. My coolest gig was I played the art museum in Milwaukee. That was a lot of fun.
So now your Etsy shop name is Ginger and Judy.
Yes.
Why Ginger and Judy?
Those are my grandmothers.
Oh, nice.
So, I came up with that. I had a fashion show that I was doing my first vintage line. I always had vintage. I had vintage in my old shop, but it was kind of like, okay, let's have a vintage collection. And I had to call it something. And this was back in 2012. And it just kind of clicked. I was like, okay, Ginger and Judy. My grandmother Ginger she shops at Chico's. She's super stylish. Yeah. She wears leopard prints. She just like more like glam chic kind of thing. And then my grandma Judy, taught me how to thrift, and she's more florals and you know, finding the cute little unique things at shops. So I kind of I am Ginger and Judy in a way. So, and my line really kind of reflects both those aesthetics. So.
Nice. And I love the photography, but we'll get to that because it's like, do you do your own photography? It's very artistic.
I do. Thank you so much. That's such a compliment. I do. And it's been a process. It's really been, one little trick you can do is you can always look back in people's sold orders, which is a lot of fun. You can see their evolution. And I think that's really neat. Etsy took away the time that it sold, which I don't know how I feel about that exactly. But you can see the evolution of what people used to sell. So if you go way back in Ginger Judy's history, you'll actually find out that I started with housewares, which is kind of interesting. But you'll see my photography get a lot better
over the years.
Yeah, definitely.
I'll tell you a secret, and anyone else who wants to know when something's sold. So if you go to the sold items and then you change it from the grid layout to the, layout in lines, you'll see the dates.
Oh, really? Thank you. That's amazing.
Yeah, I know, because sometimes I want, I never saw that there were two options, and then I did it in my shop once, and I was like, oh wait, you get more information when you do it this way.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's neat to do that because then you can, I'm always well, not so much anymore, but in the beginning I was studying other shops because, see what might be working for them or not, but just to, okay, maybe how many sales are they doing in a month or how are they doing right now? I'm not stalking shops per se, but it's a really good information.
Yeah. No, I think we all do that. At least once in a while. Now, when you had your brick and mortar shop, were you also selling online or did you only have a physical presence?
I wasn't online for the sake of time. Well, actually, that's interesting. We had a few things on, but that was back in 2010 to 2012. And Etsy's rules were you could not sell as a collective. So I carried, it's called Project M, and it carried Milwaukee and Midwest handmade fashion. I had some vintages in there as well. But the rules under Etsy guidelines were you couldn't, be a store that carried I couldn't sell under their behalf.
Right.
And they were very strict about that. And so it was a bummer because I wanted to, help my designers out even more. It would have been great. I had interns working with me. I could have done it, but they were strict about it. I mean, I saw a few shops kind of get away with it where they wouldn't say who made it or kind of just pretended that the shop owner made it.
Right.
So, and when they changed it, which was, I think in 2013 or 14, I was like, oh man, I could have did it.
You could have kept yours open.
I could have, well, and we closed for other reasons. There was issues with the building and all that, but I will say I don't miss all that comes with that brick and mortar. Yeah. It was a wonderful thing, but right now I wear a lot of hats, photographer, model, designer, all that. Back there you wore accountant, store cleaner, just so many other hats. It was like, I don't really want to have to do all this.
Yeah.
So it was such a wonderful experience though. But going on Etsy was always the dream. It was like, okay, someday I'm going to be able to travel and I'm going to, have my little online store. And so it's been a process since then for sure.
Oh, okay. So you were always cognizant of the whole e-commerce thing. Just at the time you couldn't do both.
Yeah, I mean, I started, I found Etsy in 2005. Mm-hmm. I was like 16 working in a little coffee shop in my very small town in Wisconsin. And it was like, I mean, the moment you discover Pinterest or the moment you discover Instagram or the moment you discover Tumblr, it was like all that in one. It was... And, I didn't know, I use the term indie fashion a lot. And what that means to me is everything that's outside, because fashion can have this elitism thing to it, you know? Mm-hmm. And for me, it's the vintage curators, it's the handmade shops, it's the local boutiques, independent fashion, because there's a big divide between, the big houses or the fat or, the high end. And then you've got your fast fashion, everything made overseas, sweatshop made. That's a whole other conversation I'd have you to talk about. But yeah, so indie fashion to me, and Etsy was it was my first exposure to it. Okay. I was like, wow, there's people creating, and so yeah, it was a wonderful thing, and it was always something I was kind of heading towards.
Oh wow, okay. So all right. There's so much about you I want to talk about just because, I think you've just done so much interesting stuff. But let's start from how do you describe yourself? Do you consider yourself a maker or crafter, an artiste?
Lately I've been using the term fashion gypsy, which I'm not even sure is a totally PC thing to say, but I'm somebody who, I am a designer, I'm a curator, businesswoman, entrepreneur, but I'm, I guess a do-it-yourselfer. I mean, lately, I'll also note there's this movement in Austin called Boss Babes. And it's kind of just that. It's women who are entrepreneurial and, have women-run businesses. And I've been become involved with them lately. And so lately my little thing's been, I'm a boss babe. If you check out hashtag boss babes and boss babes ATX, you can find out about their movement. It's really neat.
Huh. So do they do anything in person, or is it more like a virtual movement?
Yeah, they actually have workshops, and they have meetups every month. And this Sunday they have a conference workshop, a free workshop all day that has like coding and branding and all these things that are right up my alley. So I'm so excited because, in the Etsy world, you're kind of alone a lot, which I love being alone, so it works well. But I've realized I need to kind of get back.
You need people sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a great networking event.
Okay, and it's only local to Austin, Texas. Is that right?
It is, yeah, but I wouldn't be surprised if it expands. It's really just caught such a it's just really become huge in the last few months. And it's a really neat thing, and I think that a lot of people can just identify with what their message is, and so it'd be really neat just to follow them on Instagram and just see what they're about.
Okay, cool. And that's hashtag Boss Babes ATX.
Yeah, I believe that's, yeah.
Okay, cool. So tell us specifically what you sell on Etsy. I know we've kind of talked in generalities about it, but specifically, what do you sell?
I sell vintage fashion. Vintage is defined by Etsy is anything that's 20 years or older. So going back to 1995 or before, I primarily do 60s through 90s is what you'll find. Okay. Ready to wear. And the styles are, I've got 90s minimalism, boho, trendy. A lot of my stuff has a lot of patterns in it, and it's very whimsical is what I feel. I also sell some of my upcycled work. And that is clothes that I take and redesign. And I actually am currently featured in Altered Couture, which is a magazine that you can find at Joann's and other stores like that. And I have a couple of my designs featured in there.
How did that come about? Did they?
Etsy. That is how.
Really?
Yeah. So I haven't had a whole lot of networking in the way of finding people and having like all this amazing stuff happened, but in the last year, it's kind of felt like, okay, something's coming together here, including this podcast, which is so wonderful. But yeah, they reached out to me and they found me and they had me send some of their work, and then they picked two of the designs. And it's a really neat thing to bring to my markets to show people like, hey, the dress you're looking at, like one of the designs are in here. So
wow. So they were looking specifically about the stuff you had. I'm looking at the stuff you had made, not the vintage items you were carrying. Your upcycled designs.
They had probably searched the tag upcycled dress. That magazine is primarily like kind of boho, shabby chic, altered couture. Well, it's literally called altered couture, but upcycle, which is this word for, if you kind of look at the definition, it was invented in the last 10 or 15 years, but it's kind of a trash to treasure kind of thing.
Yeah.
A more accurate, or maybe like if you've seen stuff where they're taking old tires and making it into like a clutch handbag.
Yeah. That's
a really good example of upcycling. It's hard. These words are so tricky.
Yes.
To, upcycled, recycled fashion, eco chic. I've always kind of stayed away from the, those kind of words. Kind of granola comes into mind, which might not be but I don't really think my stuff is eco in that way. It is it is coincidentally, but upcycled's been a word I've kind of used lately.
Okay, so when I think eco, I think environment. I think of the environment, and that you're making an effort to reuse and reduce stuff, reduce waste. Is that part of what you're doing with your designs? Is that an intentional goal, or it just so happens that?
It is very much an intentional goal. I think when I learned under a fashion designer, an indie fashion designer, and it also was just fabric stores are hard to come by in a small town in Wisconsin, even where I was living in Milwaukee. So I was going to the thrift stores and, redesigning clothes, using tablecloths, using used fabric. But for me, that's where I find inspiration. When I'm designing, it comes from that. A couple of years ago, I did a collection called Blankets, and and there's a couple of dresses still in the shop. I took crocheted blankets and I redesigned them into women's dresses, and then I did a fashion show, and we raised a bunch of money for the women's shelter in Milwaukee, and that's my craft. I'm not so much somebody who's going to draw something up and then go to the fabric store and just find the color and the content. I'm not inspired in that way. So yeah, for me it does. The passion is definitely it's definitely about recycled. It's just I'm not a big fan of I don't know. It lands on people differently, if that makes sense.
You know what you remind me of who? Have you seen The Sound of Music?
Yes, a long time ago.
Right. Remember how Maria sewed clothes for the kids from the drapes and the bedding and all that? That's what comes to mind when you decide where your inspiration comes from. Yeah.
And where it does come from was Gone with the Wind, when she makes the drapes into the dress. That, for me, watching that at like 10 or 11, that's a pinpoint of something went off of me. I was like, that is so cool. Like, and I do want to give a little bit of a shout out, not in the Etsy world, because he does have an Etsy, which is great. But a couple of years ago, my friend Timothy Westbrook was on Project Runway, if there's any Project Runway fans out there. And he was the guy that refused to buy fabric at Mood.
Oh.
And he's like the hardcore trash to treasure recycled fashion guy. And his name is Timothy Westbrook, and he went back to New York now, but he was really he is an inspiration to me. He's an amazing designer.
And he now sells on Etsy, you said?
I'm sorry?
And you said he now sells on Etsy.
He does have some wonderful pieces on Etsy. It's not his main thing. But I guess maybe, can I take any credit for Timmy being on Etsy? Maybe. I have pushed him, because I am like that. I'm a pusher when it comes to getting people on Etsy.
Oh, nice. Yeah, you can go ahead and take the credit. We'll give it to you.
Wonderful.
So let's talk about vintage and how you got into vintage. I know you've kind of said it was kind of out of necessity, but how did you develop an eye for what you knew would sell? Because, you can walk into a thrift store or a vintage store and there's lots of stuff there, but how do you know what will work and what won't? Like, what will appeal to a wider audience that you decide you will carry in your shop?
I've come to realize now that it's a skill that I've really honed over the years. I think before it was kind of like, oh, you kind of know or you don't know. And then now I'm like, okay, that's not true at all. I've been in the thrift stores looking for cool, unique things since I was 14 or 15. But I am constantly looking for things that are well made, that have held up over time, and I'm looking at the trends, definitely, and then just things that are more classic. But when I first started, I was not as confident, for sure. I remember thinking, well, what if I buy all this stuff, and then I have all this stuff that doesn't even fit me, and then I just have a bunch of stuff and it doesn't fit. So it's a skill I've honed over time, but I think it's also, if you are interested in getting into it, it's just see what other people are doing. But I think what's also beautiful is, at first I had this idea that it's all the same. Everybody who sells vintage, they just have vintage. And now, between the markets and Etsy, I realize everybody has their own eye. And these collections come that are totally different than another person's collection. I think that's what's so wonderful about the world of vintage.
I love it. So, one of the things when I first discovered Etsy that I wasn't aware of was I always thought of Etsy as being just a handmade marketplace. And in the beginning it was.
Yep.
But then after a while, they opened up the marketplace to vintage items. And I think there's this, and you and I talked very briefly about it, so I want us to jump into it more. This thing about vintage versus handmade. What's your view about that, like in the Etsy marketplace or even beyond? But let's talk Etsy.
Definitely. Before I was on Etsy, I'll go back. I had two shops at the beginning. I had Brie Rose Design, and then I opened Ginger and Judy, and I was trying to do both.
Not easy.
No, definitely not. And I was back in, I don't know when I changed, but at the beginning, I definitely was anti-vintage on Etsy.
Really?
Just because I didn't, I thought that it didn't have a place. I just didn't understand. And I still have, a little bit of, I guess, some people who do the vintage and they're kind of just, it feels a little garage sale-y. They don't quite have a vision. They're just kind of selling stuff.
Yeah.
But I also had that attitude kind of towards, because I was, I don't know, kind of the alternative punk teenager that thrifted all my clothes and like, I'm not going to pay any more money for it. And so it took me.
Let's fight the institution. Let's fight the fashion institution.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. Sorry.
Oh.
But go on.
But yeah, I had to really understand what vintage was. And it's a whole, and I'm still learning. It's kind of amazing how, you have these high-end sellers and then you've got, ones that are selling for almost like in a fast fashion way. It's a lot cheaper and they're doing a mass quantity. Yeah. And then somewhere in between, which I guess is what I consider myself. But yeah, I guess at some point when I got older, I there is a place for both. And at this point, I'll say that, I'm always encouraging people to open an Etsy or shop on Etsy because I feel like it, you can easily say, oh, there's so many people on there. If you're passionate and you have a unique point of view and you put in the time, you will succeed. And what I would hope is, and I'll also talk about my blog, which is gingerandjudy.com, which I'm just getting started with, but going back to the days of Project M, my boutique, I'm passionate about teaching people about indie fashion in general. Just letting people know, hey, you don't have to go to the mall. Because I know you might go to the mall broke and still spend $30 on a dress that, is going to fall apart in 6 months or was made by, a child in a land far, far away. So the more we educate people on, hey, where is my fashion coming from? Or when I buy a gift for somebody, what's the story behind it? Is the more we can educate people, then we're going to need the Etsy sellers to fill those roles, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it does. So, when you first opened did you open two Etsy shops at the same time, or did you open one before one and then another, and then you were trying to run two at the same time?
I think I had Rosefly. Rosefly was my first line, and I was making bags out of recycled upholstery fabric and dresses out of remade dresses and all. That was kind of what my line and my work still reflects, but I was doing that and earrings as well. And it was hard, and I really feel for those who do have handmade things on Etsy because I love my pieces. They're my treasures. I'm so excited to bring them to their next home. But I do understand pouring your heart and soul into your work and then having to, put it out in the world and then feel so emotional about it. But yeah. So then I had Brie Rose, in my vision, I always struggled with, okay, I want to do the vintage and I want to do my upcycled handmade stuff. And finally, and what Ginger Judy has been about for the last few years is I was like, okay, let's build an Etsy business around the vintage. And then when I get to a point where I feel secure and I'm, like I'm ever going to feel, you're never there, right?
Right, yeah.
But when I get to a point where it's my bread and butter, it's paying the bills, then I can go back to designing because I've built this audience and it works in with the vintage. So now, and it's like, okay, well, duh. But back then it was really, I was tormented by, I wanted a pure handmade line and I wanted the vintage on its own thing. And I think maybe at that point I still was not putting, I was always putting handmade on a pedestal.
Yeah.
And I still, when I go to markets, because I sell at local markets in Austin, which is part of the reason that I moved here is because it has such a great scene. I still put handmade on a pedestal. You know, I'm still like, oh, you're hand making your work.
Right.
You know, I definitely still actually, but a lot of my markets, I'm selling a lot of my handmade stuff. It's not on Etsy as much because I enjoy selling it in person a little bit more, and I'm kind of waiting for, okay, what do people like most? What's working best? And then I'll move it to Etsy.
Yeah.
So it's like a little test market for me, which is great.
Oh, that makes sense. What do you think was the hardest thing about having to run 2 shops when you did?
Well, they weren't up and running, and, you know, they weren't and I knew in the back of my mind, I was like, okay, I can't do this. Like, it's so hard to do one on your own. I need to streamline. And if all my effort is going into, you know, to split, then, you know, this is crazy. So I had, the hardest thing really was kind of giving up that, okay, you know, I had this thing of, you know, Bree Rose was my DJ name and my designer name. So do I want to have Ginger and Judy? Do I want to design into that? And at this point, I'm so happy I did that because I can kind of remove myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I still have people that go, well, I want to meet Ginger and Judy, and they kind of have and I feel like 2 people half the time. So it's so it works out great. But yeah, just the hardest thing was just coming to terms with, okay, like you need to streamline. You need to just narrow down, which is, I think, a hard thing for a lot of creative people.
Yes, it is hard. And I'll say when we first started communicating, I too was like, oh, Ginger and Judy. And then you were Bree Rose. I'm like, am I talking to 4 people? Am I talking to 1 person?
Oh no, yeah, that's not a bad thing. I like a little mystery. But yeah, and it's funny, I actually had an experience at a market. I met these wonderful sellers from Oregon, and they were coming through with a traveling boutique, and one of them came and they said, well, who models for you? And I was like, oh, that's me. And they're like, oh, no way, like with the hair, you know, because my hair changes all the time, and I'm, you know, all dialed up and all that. So I was like, oh yeah, like I am 2 people, you know. And I think another reason I like the name Ginger and Judy is because in my fashion, in my personal style, I've always felt that this duality of, you know, the way I like to dress, and I think a lot of like fashionista people can relate to that, of like, oh, I'm this sporty, like chic person, but then the next day I'm Hollywood glam, and just like, I think that's what's so wonderful about fashion is we can change with the message we want to send.
Yeah, you can be fluid.
Yeah, definitely.
So one thing I want to ask you, because I know this question came up and I can't remember if it was in the Facebook group or somewhere else, whether I saw it in the forums, but selling I wouldn't say 2 different product lines, but so in Ginger and Judy, your Etsy shop, you carry vintage items and then you also carry your handmade items. Do you feel that it takes anything away from one or the other that you're mixing handmade and vintage under one roof now?
No, I don't. I feel like they add to each other. I am also scouring the internet for people who do that. Mm-hmm. So if there's anybody out there who's riding the vintage and handmade world and trying to have it under one line, please contact me, or let's connect, because for me, I've noticed. So here's how I envision. Okay. If you're on, I feel like it might be easier to sell vintage in a way, for me at least, because let's say I just had this woman. Actually, she bought locally from me, but found me on Etsy, and she was looking for a burnt orange 70s boho dress, and so she probably searched burnt orange 70s boho dress. And she was going to an event at UT, and orange is their color. Oh. So yeah, she specifically knew what she wanted. Mm-hmm. She found me. If I'm in the one of my upcycled scarf dresses, I don't think people are necessarily going to look for that unless they've seen it before. So vintage kind of, and on that's the point where I can see, the handmade community being a little bit like, oh, like I'm sitting here working my butt off making these things, and somebody else is just going to buy it. But we're 2 different things. Right. And I would be curious to know how the numbers break down as far as how many, what vintage makes up on Etsy. But having them together, what I'm hoping, this is just my plan, hopefully, is building the shop up to a point where I have an audience, and then I can say, hey, audience, like especially on Instagram, check this out, check out my work that I'm doing. If you're a fan of vintage, you're probably going to like my stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I'm headed with that.
Okay, good plan. So let's talk about setting realistic expectations. Do you remember how long it took between the time when you first opened your shop and put stuff up for sale and when you got that first sale?
Let's see, that was with my first shop, and I was selling mainly my little suede earrings. Mm-hmm. It wasn't too long afterwards, but back then it was I just was kind of selling things here and there. It was when I opened Ginger and Judy, and then since I had those kind of start and stops at the beginning, mm-hmm. I knew heading into this, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this right. Like, I'm going to consistently list. I'm going to make sure my photos look good. And I really headed in there, and I was always setting goals. I had, I'm going to list this much and I want to make this much. And I've really just kind of climbed since then.
Oh, wow. So do you set daily goals, weekly goals, monthly goals? How do you do it? How do you hold yourself?
I'm setting, monthly goals as far as listings and what the money I want to make. I've had a turning point in the last few months, which is really exciting because you get to a point, and this is interesting too, is like, when you're selling vintage, you're selling one of a kind. So I actually envy the people out there who have like 25 products, and then when one sells, it relists.
Yeah.
I mean, I get that there's a whole other thing to that, but for me, more listings equates to more sales, more or less. Mm. So there's always this thing of like, well, if I could just get 50 more up a week, or, whatever that is. Mm-hmm. But I've reached a point now where I consistently have over 350 listings. So I had to look at it and kind of reevaluate and say, okay, I don't want to just keep listing more listings. I want to make sure I have cohesion here, and I need to move into marketing and take that seriously. So that's when I started using Instagram a lot more and just kind of saying, okay, hey, how can I sell what's already there? Which was because it takes a lot to get to that point,
Yeah.
Where your shop feels full. I have a system down with shooting, and now it's like I need to, and it feels really cool because I have a little bit of breathing room to, go out and sell myself, because it's hard to, you wait till you get to that point. And I feel like I got to that point where, Ginger and Judy was this thing, it was its own animal, and I could go sell that into the world in a different way. So
nice. So now how does a typical day look like for you?
I'm usually up and doing my listings right away. And that means the day before I have shot things and inventoried them. So if I, with my morning coffee in my pajamas, which is like living the dream, right? Like that's what I wanted to do. And so I'm getting my listings out of the way, because then it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the day where, the sales can come in, and I at least know, because it's really all about getting those listings done, and they're kind of a pain. Okay. But so I'm usually trying to do that in the morning. And then I'm usually doing a shoot anywhere from 3 to 5 times a week. I try to shoot. Okay. And I've learned what works for me is just mini shoots. So I'm shooting like 10 to 12 pieces, because it's just more realistic than steaming a whole rack of clothes and then something happens or you get distracted, or just trying to do those kind of things. So I've developed a system with that where so I have to steam everything, and then I'm either shooting it on myself or on my mannequin. And then I edit the photos, which used to be a process. And that's it used to take me a long time to do that, and I have a system down now where I can do that a lot quicker, which feels really, really good. And then I'm always answering customer questions, but that always comes in. I let that interrupt me. It's not overwhelming, but one thing with, selling online feels like wonderful, right? Like, it just sells itself. Actually, a lot of my sales are somebody coming to me and they say, I have this event, I need this by Thursday, can you get it to me? Or I know that if we're impulse shop, we shop it that way in person, we shop that way online. So if somebody wants something and they have a question, I need to answer it right now. So that comes at any point in my day, even sometimes in the middle of the night. I'm, run and take an extra measurement for somebody or check on something, and it's a really important part of my business. And I think for any Etsy seller, that's really important, is get back to your customers.
Yeah.
So I'm doing that at any point, and then social media takes up a bit of time, although I try not to obsess over that too much. I've been using Instagram a lot. And then another part of my daily activity has been education. I'm going to school full time right now.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm taking graphic design classes. I'm more taking classes just for my business. I would love to finish a degree sometime, but I'm just kind of focused on graphic design, and I'm also studying photography next semester. So that's a part-time job right now. So that's taking up a part of my business day as well.
Wow. Okay, so I have some questions regarding the pictures. So in some of them, you're the model, and
Yes.
some of them use a mannequin. The ones that you're the model, do you use a timer on your camera, or do you have someone take the pictures of you?
I used to have I used to actually trade with the other shop. I'd model for her. And that was back in Milwaukee, and that worked out really well. Then my boyfriend was shooting with me. But what works best for me is independence, because I like to work sometimes strange hours of the day. So I was like, okay, I need to shoot on my own. So I did have a remote that I used, and it was faulty. It just didn't work half the time. So I use a timer, and it's great because I'm experienced enough now with modeling where I can set the timer and walk over, pose, click, done, and I can just get it done in 5 or 6 shots, which is really great.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm using a timer and just a wall, and I have an external flash on my Canon T3i.
Okay. Then the other thing I noticed is, and you mentioned this, in some pictures you use yourself as the model, and then some you use a mannequin. How do you decide when something will look better on you wearing it versus on a mannequin?
Yeah, that's been a big part of my business. I was pretty I was hell-bent on everything's got to be shot on me, you've got to see it on a model. And then I really realized that there's some things that just don't look right on me. I mean, we don't all look perfect in everything. And then
Right.
there adds a subjectiveness to it. So I might style it a certain way. So what I'm usually doing is trying it on and then looking at the mannequin. And sometimes I'll listen both ways. But, and then how I'm shooting is I'm collecting things, and then I'm shooting in collections and batches. So right now I just listed a bunch of blazers.
Okay.
So I've collected those rather than, just shoot things at random, I'm going to shoot a dress and then I'm going to shoot a vest.
Right.
I just kind of do them in batches, which really actually helps my customers who are checking the shop, and they're like, oh, I need a blazer. And then they've got 15 new ones to look through.
Right.
And it took me a while to get to that point. It's been really exciting because it feels like it feels like I'm launching a collection, every week or so.
Right.
So
Does that also help with listing when you list
Yes.
a bunch of the same thing back to back?
yes, definitely that, and it so much so. And if you're not using the copy feature on Etsy, you should be using the copy feature.
I
on
love the
Etsy.
copy feature. Yes.
Yeah. So definitely, and I'm to the point now where I have a 1980s houndstooth jacket, and I think I sold one a year ago, and I can go back into that listing and use those tags, because that's a tricky part about it's a whole learning curve, is learning the vintage, learning what you're selling, and I'm always learning. And you can learn from other Etsy sellers, you can learn just by researching, by fashion blogs, but learning about the types of vintage blazers, or the fabric content, or the way a skirt's cut, all of that. And for me, it was so exciting to learn all that. So,
And the other thing too about using the copy feature that I want to ask, so when you use the copy feature, it carries over the tags.
yes.
Now, do you switch out the tags just so that you can get found for different tags, so that not all your blazers have all the same tags?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
keeping, I keep maybe half of them, and then I'm changing them to be specific.
Yes.
And I'm always using all of them, and I'm always using 2 words at a time, if not 3. And tags are really, really important. And I I could really get obsessed if I wanted to go back and tweak tags all day. I could, because that's how you get found, and do some, basic SEO research, and that's a really important aspect of listing.
Okay. Now, one of the reasons I'm really happy to talk to you, because you sell vintage and you sell your own handmade items, is when it comes to product pricing. So when you make your own thing, you can pretty much, you figure in the cost of what you made, the cost of what you used to make it, the time you spent on all that. How do you determine the pricing for your vintage items? And how does that differ from how you set the pricing for the upcycled items that you make yourself?
Yeah, I do I do struggle with kind of tweaking a little bit. And lately I've kind of played with this thing of, you see some vintage shops that are really, their price point's higher. I've realized I need to learn my market a little bit more. I need to, learn my target audience. So the next thing I want to move into is doing some kind of survey of people that have bought from me, and I would like to gather some information to know, what can they afford, or what are they willing to spend.
Yeah.
But my generally my upcycled handmade work costs a little bit more because there's more time there.
Yes.
I also put into consideration how much I bought the vintage item for. There are a few things where I'm not working with a lot of capital. It would be really wonderful to go to the vintage stores that are already created and find those really stellar pieces and then mark them up really more. But I'm really try to keep things fairly affordable, and the way I price things, a lot of times I'm checking what the market is being Etsy.
Okay.
So, if I might search the designer name and the description of the dress, and I'm seeing what other sellers are selling, and overall it's pretty consistent, which is really awesome.
Oh, good.
So I'm kind of, I'm just, what does the market say?
Okay.
And most of my pieces are between $30 and $50.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. The other thing I wonder with vintage, so do you process the items before you send them? Like, do you launder them or dry clean them or what have you, because you're getting them from someone else?
Yeah, I am not doing a mass laundering, because I used to do that in the very beginning, and that's a really bad idea because...
Oh, is it?
It would be, for me especially, it would be just a whole other job as far as making sure you're washing things correctly and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, if something has an odor, I definitely do hand wash it or dry clean it.
Okay.
Rarely does that happen, but usually things don't have a smell. What I am looking for, though, is making sure that there's no blemishes on the fabric, or tears or rips or anything like that. I'm very... I check it 7 or 8 times. I'm checking it 3 times in the store, and I'm checking it when I shoot it, after I shoot it, and a few times before I send it. And it's I would say part of my success has been remaining just a lot of integrity around my products. And it does happen where I would say maybe once, every few months, where something arrives. No, it's not even that. It's actually after I've listed it, I've found something wrong once it's bought, and I message the person and say, hey, there's a little bit of this issue. I'd like to give you a 25% discount, and 99% of the time it's worked out fine, where they totally understand and they don't mind. And it does happen. I'm working with a lot of different products.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at my Etsy reviews, you'll see that there's a lot of really happy people, because for me, it's really important, the integrity over what the $10 that you're going to lose.
Yeah.
It's been something since the beginning that I've been really consistent on. Just, it's really important to me. As somebody who shops online as well, I want to know that I'm being taken care of, and that I'm, the person's being accurate, and mistakes happen, and I really do try my best, but you have to know that when you're selling vintage, it's going to happen.
Right. Yeah.
Because sometimes it's just a matter of, excuse me, sometimes it's just a matter of, a button fell off later or something like that. But it's not, it was a very scary thing at the beginning. I was like, how in the world, am I going to make sure everything is always okay? Because it's just so much. But I was also very scared about taking measurements in the beginning. I don't know why, but I was like, well, what if it doesn't fit right? And it's really not that hard. You lie the garment flat, and then you take the bust measurement underarm to underarm. You take the waist at the small of the waist, and you take the hip at the widest of the hip, which a lot of time on dresses, it's open. And then you take the length, you go from the top of the collar and back to where it falls. And then sometimes I do sleeves. And at the beginning, it was like, oh, that just seems like, I was really intimidated by it. But it's it's a really important part of sewing, and it's definitely worth, people need to know what the measurements are, because the sizing is very different.
Yeah. And then the other thing I noticed too is as time goes by, sizes change. So what in the 60s was considered, a size 6, today might not be the same, what we call a size 6 today. How do you do the conversions for your customers, and how do you let them know what, this particular size from back then is in today's measurements?
If you look on each of my listings, I have size, and then I have fits like modern. So I always have that. And it's always different. I have the luxury of not selling a lot of 30s and 40s and 50s because the size is a lot different then. Very different. And also there's a lot of really small clothing. And I really appreciate those sellers, and I love looking at that stuff. And to me, that's like, to a lot of people, that's the true vintage, right? Mm-hmm. So, I have the size and then fits like modern. So I'm taking those measurements, and then I use a size chart. I use the website www.womenssizechart.com. That's the size chart I've always used. So, I'm comparing that measurement, and I've pretty much got them all memorized by now, but to what the actual measurement that I'm taking. Generally, for the 60s, 70s, it's about a size or so smaller. So, a size 6 dress from the 60s would fit more like a 4 modern. In the 80s, it kind of does this thing where it's almost the opposite, where you have like a medium size windbreaker, and really it fits like a large now because everything was just oversized. And in the 90s, which because vintage is considered, Etsy considers vintage in the 90s from 90 to 95, so you've got a lot of club wear coming back and grunge and all that, and generally those sizes are pretty much the same, but there's always, you have to account for shrinking, or just, some stuff is just sized weird, or somebody took it in. So I'm always, I'm never looking at that as, okay, that's the size. I'm always investigating, like, okay, how does this actually fit?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the things I wondered too, because I know that sizes today are different from before.
Definitely.
Okay, cool. And I'll put that resource in the notes for this episode for the women's size chart, just for anyone who wants to check it out and see.
I found it to be really accurate.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about how you promote your Etsy shop. What's your strategy for getting the word out there about what you're doing on Etsy and what you're selling?
So my main strategy is it's kind of Etsy itself, where I'm making sure I'm staying up on listings. If I fall behind on listing, I fall behind on sales. There's a direct link there. So the biggest thing is just staying consistent, because I've got about 1,700 admirers on Etsy now. So I'm to the point now where I have an audience that's just watching what I'm listing. So that's the key. That's your target audience right there. People who've already bought from you, and then listing new things and reaching new people. Second to that would probably be, I sell at local markets every weekend. So I'm making customers, but also I'm handing out coupons from my Etsy store, and they're always really excited because they know what Etsy is, and they, and I do. And what's really great about that is when you use your coupon code, you can track how the person, who's using the code ultimately, and you can have up to 100 different coupon codes. So that's really neat. Yeah. And then thirdly, I'm using Instagram and just listing things on Instagram as I list them, which is really fun to do, because it's like, okay, I shot it, I styled it, I listed it, and it's like, now I get to go post it on Instagram, get these
Yes.
likes, and it really does give you that instant gratification,
It
which I really like.
does.
And it has led to sales for me, so that's been wonderful.
Oh, good. So as far as, okay, listing consistently, I know that's very important. Do you set specific goals, like every week you want to make sure you get at least 10 new items up, or do you do a mix of new and relisting or renewing your listings? Sorry.
I did listen to the seller that you had on recently that had suggested relisting the items or renewing, which is really interesting. And I did do that, experiment with that a little bit. I will do that when I've got a piece, like I have this cape right now, this like 1960s gray, gorgeous cape. I know capes are in style right now. It like already has 60 likes or something. I will relist that because I'm like, okay, somebody's going to buy this. So I go to those pieces and relist. Otherwise, I let them ride out and I renew. I don't auto renew because I want to just see okay what didn't sell.
Me too.
And yeah. So
have you found that the relisting helps to get more views or more sales when you've done it?
Yeah, I think it has worked a little bit. I haven't done it in a really strict experiment, but I think when you've got a bunch of listings, and I think it's a great strategy too for, if you are somebody who has 24 listings, you might come up with 6 more products in the next few months because you're making handmade and you're not making that much stuff. I think it's a good strategy for sure.
Okay. Then how about for new items? Do you set specific goals, like to have a certain number listed per week, because you have that 350 threshold that you set?
Yeah, I did to get to where I am now. I definitely did. At the beginning, it was like, okay, I need 100 items. I want 100 items. And it's really a lot of work, especially when you're selling at the same time,
Yeah.
So to get to where I am now, and so now I've kind of been to the point, if you look, there's some vintage sellers online that have 600 listings or they have 900 listings, which is amazing. And I think, to be realistic, that's going to be more sales, but it's also, being the one woman operation that I am, it's not realistic. And it also will change my shop. I don't want to be just like, oh, it's vintage and it's kind of cute, I'm just going to list it for $12. Like, I want to keep a good curation, a good, a good vision with my store. So, what I'm doing now is I'm kind of replenishing as much as I'm selling, because I'm in this place where I'm going back to school, and I have to be realistic about like, okay, the store is not going to radically change. I just want to kind of lock in what I have now, because I really do feel like I've reached a point where there's a cohesion to it all.
Yeah, and it looks good.
Thank you.
So I noticed that you also have a 50% off and free shipping section. What does it take for an item to get to that place? Is it like a way for you to destash and move inventory that hasn't moved in a while?
Yeah, it definitely is for that. And that is something I borrowed just kind of from the industry and from, it's like, okay, you go to a store and they have to have stuff that they break even on, or at least they get 100% markup of what or whatever the exact equation that they have. So it's been great for me to have. I do sell out of it, and I just think I will always have that. I think it's just really great for if somebody's just like, man, I love this store, I want to buy something, and then they get to go to that section. And free shipping is always fun. So
free shipping is the best, yes. So do you find that? Oh, I'm sorry. Go on.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, do you find that once you move something into that category, it does tend to move out?
Yeah, generally. I mean, it's not quite as fast. Another way I used it was, one of the things that's difficult when you're evolving as a shop, which is really what I've done, is, I might have stuff that wasn't photographed as well or styled as well, or maybe I just am like, okay, like I've had this for too long. It's a way to unload there, but I also have that for markets, which is really wonderful as far as moving product. But I did go through this episode where it was like a growing pain, like a teenager, where it was, okay, my shop doesn't look quite how I want it to look. And you know what? It's never going to look. That's just part of it, right?
Yeah.
But my photography was improving, and I had a vision of like what I want, and it's still changing and evolving. But when you have such an inventory, you can't, I'm just going to reshoot everything today and list it. Like, that's not realistic.
Yeah.
So, there's like this mantra in my head. It has to be like, just keep moving ahead. Don't look back and dwell, because that's not going to just take what you've learned and apply it to the next thing.
I like that. So Instagram is your social media outlet of choice. Do you dabble anywhere else on social media, or you're pretty focused on Instagram because you've seen good results from it?
I'm on everything because I think that if that's just what you should do, you should set up the Twitter, set up the Tumblr, set up the Pinterest. I have everything. And then, you have to be realistic about what do you use the most. And Instagram brings me that joy of being able to share it and get instant gratification. Yeah. And it's one thing I learned. I attended a fashion bloggers conference a couple of years ago in New York, and I'm not a fashion blogger. Someday I would like to be, when I have the time and build mine up. But that was a really neat thing to do, because everything we learned was really relative to being a Etsy store owner. And, when you're a fashion blogger, you need to be on all those outlets. And at the same time, you can't let that consume you because it is your way of promoting. So I'd, pick what works. And Facebook, as a lot of people say, just isn't the most ideal for that. But I do have, I have 2,000 friends on Facebook as a result of being a DJ club promoter person. So I have that, and it's nice to be able to share. Like today I posted, hey, I'm going to be on this podcast. I'll post it. So I have that audience of people who, know me as the fashion persona DJ. I can share that with them, but that's not my target audience. And I have to be realistic. And I do post, stuff from shoots and when I'm having a sale, but I know that that's not my, those aren't the people that are ultimately going to be buying from me in mass. So for me to just, post nonstop over there and then be like, oh, why isn't anybody buying anything? It's not realistic. So.
Okay. So now you also have two websites. You have let's talk about gingerandjudy.com, because that's the one that I think ties into your Etsy shop.
Yeah, that links to my Etsy shop. I also have brie-rose.com. Yes. And I will always have that. That is actually that's both my Instagram feeds put together. Oh. So one thing you can do that's really neat is, everybody needs to have a website because there's really no excuse at this point. So, brie-rose.com is, just a way I can store kind of just my life events. So if you look at it, it's very clean, very streamlined. It's basically a feed for my Instagram. So I link both my personal and my business Instagrams to that. And basically everything that I do online ends up on that website, if that makes sense. So it's just like my feed. It's my life, personal and business. So it's kind of like, I guess, my visual blog. But my vision for Ginger and Judy is I just have a lot of passion for helping people who do what I do, who, sell at markets, or they're selling on Etsy, or they have a craft, or they're a fashion designer or a curator of some sort. Just this whole world is what I've been really infatuated with for the last 10 years. And I have a lot of knowledge, and I also just have a lot of curiosity. So I'm wanting to build that blog up for vintage and handmade fashion. And so if you check it out right now, it links to my shop, it has a little bio, and it's something that I'm going to be continuing to build. Okay. And especially now that I've studied graphic design, because that was a big part of it, is I'm like, okay, you have to have the visual with it. So yeah. So it's been really great to learn Photoshop and InDesign and Illustrator is what I'm learning right now.
Oh, cool. And I'm going to have links to both brie-rose.com. It's brie-rose.com, yes, as well as gingerandjudy.com. So if you're listening to this and you're not near a computer, go to convome.com/gingerandjudy, and all the links for Brie's website, her Etsy shop, and social media will all be on there. So if you don't remember, you can find them there.
Awesome.
So now, between school and running this business, about how much time do you find that you're spending just is catering to the right word? Tending to your business and growing that, and not just the Etsy shop, but everything you do for it. So the markets that you attend in person and all whatnot.
So what was really, my vision was always going back to school. I was like, I'm going to have an Etsy shop and it's going to pay my bills while I go back to school. And so it's really cool to actually be doing that now.
Mm-hmm.
But it's forced me to become very calculated in my time, obviously. Mm-hmm. So I'm to the point now that, I might probably working 20 to 30 hours a week versus I used to be working 40 to 50. Right. And I will say part of that is social media, it's researching, it's, finding out how to shoot things better. It's just a lot of education. And I'm still in that same vein of like, how can I be better? So now I'm probably working 25 to 30 hours a week, just listing, kind of perfecting my line, and sewing. I'm still sewing, which a lot of my work is at local markets, but after the holidays, I'm going to be putting a lot more of that online. It's just the quickest and easiest way for me to sell at markets right now. And I think that's really important, is to diversify your income in that way. So yeah, I have a system down now. When I shoot, when I steam, and then I store, it feels really, really good to get to that point where, okay, this works. Like, it's not so much of a overwhelming, like, pull out my hair, like, I want everything to be perfect. I am a perfectionist, like I think a lot of us sellers are, but I have a system now where I can almost treat it like I always use the phrase like dishwashing. Like, you just go in and you get it done. You're just dishwashing. And for some things that I've, like the listing, it's like, okay, go in. Yes, you're going to do as good as you're going to find the best tags that you can do, but you just have to do it. You have to execute. So going back to school has been about like, okay, I go in, I do my work, and I execute, and then I move on, which has felt really good.
So you're attending local markets as well. How do you select the local events, maybe not just markets, but the local events that you want to participate in? Because in Austin, I know it's a very artsy community. It's very, I don't know what the word to describe. I think it's kind of like the Bay Area, where the art community is really big and it's very entrenched as part of the society. So I know that there are probably lots of options for you. So how do you select which ones you want to get involved with?
There are, and it's hard because there's definitely a huge learning curve with markets. Like, I've been selling at them since I was 18. I've done some really, really bad markets, and you still do bad markets. That's just the nature of it. For me, it's been a necessity because when I moved to Austin a year ago, I went from like kind of knowing everybody and going out and like running into people to like, I don't know anybody. So I, and which was good because I did get a lot of work done, but now I'm to the point of going out and really networking and reaching out to people. And these markets are so amazing for that. I mean, it really just like, networking was one of the things where until you feel like, oh, wait, I met this person through this, and like, wow, that actually worked. At these markets, it's really great. I'm working with Austin Flea, which is an organization. They have markets at different locations every month, and then they have a few mini fleas. And it's funny because one thing I've noticed, see, I'm from the Midwest, I'm from Milwaukee. They don't really use the term flea market for, craft markets. Flea market to me was always like, oh, that's where you go buy a bunch of crappy treasures, So here it was interesting. I was like, flea market. Like, I don't know if I want to sell to flea market. And then, oh, okay. That's different, like that. I don't know if it's the South or whatever, but that's who I've been working with. And there are a lot of wonderful markets. And that was part of why I moved here was, there's a scene here. There's a scene everywhere, though. If you're living in a small town in Ohio, there's probably a farmer's market that happens. And, that's a great way to get your work out there and to engaging with customers. Now I crave it. I mean, I don't want to go back and open the shop and have all that, but if I can, this weekend I've got market all day Saturday at a brewery, and it's a unique event, and you're making money and you're sharing your stuff with people. I love it. Nice. Hopefully I don't get burnt out again, but after the holidays you get a break, so that's always nice.
Yeah. And that's a good thing. It gets crazy busy in the holidays, but then that there's peace coming at the end.
Yeah, I miss that. I do miss that about having my boutique was, I mean, people would just come in and they would just throw $20 at you and be like, I just need something, hand me a gift. Right? But I don't get that rush with the vintage. So that's part of why I'm making my earrings and I make little makeup bags and my dresses because those are what more sell at the markets because they're more gift oriented. You're less likely to buy vintage so that's one kind of downside of vintage. And I'd be curious to know if any other vintage. I do have a section right now for holiday dresses and New Year's dresses on my shop, and
I saw
that is one avenue that I have for sure.
Okay.
But I'm not doing the whole where 40% of my business comes in December, like, which, maybe that's good because for me, I need a little bit more consistency.
Yeah. And I think with vintage, it's more, what's the word? I guess, yeah, consistent, like you said. I don't think towards the end of the year, anybody's specifically looking to buy a lot more vintage than they were in the summer. So you said, again, that's Austin Flea that you're working with? Okay. And do you know if they have a website?
I believe it's austinflea.com.
Okay. And I'll look it up and put the link in the show notes too.
Oh, it's .net, yeah.
Okay.
And if you're in the Austin area, they have just wonderfully curated events, and it's been going on for years. And it's really important to know what you're getting yourself into. I mean, I've sold back in the day. It's like, oh wait, why am I here? Like this is my stuff does not fit this demographic, and there's a learning curve to it. But if you're just getting started out, embrace that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Austin Flea. So what's something about selling online, especially having come from brick and mortar, that you really like? And then what's something that you would change if you could? And I guess specifically selling on the Etsy platform.
Well, my favorite thing is the ability to travel. Is like I love to travel. I don't do it as much as I want to, but it's something down the road where I want to kind of incorporate it into my business, especially with blogging and just traveling. And a lot of times when I'm traveling is when I'm finding some of my coolest inventory.
Okay.
So I love that. I also love the fact that I might, with my shop, I might find this amazing sequin beaded jacket that's just so incredible and great condition, and all I want to do is find the perfect person. Not that there's one person out there, but I want to find somebody who's really going to appreciate it and needs it.
Yeah,
so when you're selling at a shop, you might not have that connection, but when you're putting it out in the world, I mean, it's like the amount of gratitude that some of my customers have where they're so excited. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? I'm the one that's excited. But it's just such a neat experience where, they found exactly what they're looking for.
Yeah.
So that's what's wonderful about having that world audience.
And
one thing I would change, you mean like with the Etsy?
Yeah, like, is there a feature that you would like to see implemented on the Etsy platform?
I think that it's funny because I'm always like, I'm on it. I'm just such a fan. I think that they're really good at implementing things that we need over time. I think one thing I've always played around with was wanting a little bit of more customization with my shop. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I kind of counter that because I really enjoy the simplicity and that, it's really democratic. Like, anybody can go do it. You can be set up in 5 minutes kind of thing.
Yeah.
I guess visually it would be neat if I could arrange my shop in a different way, but I also think that that's what your blog is for. That's what your social media is for. So, something in that regard, maybe just the fact that the most customization I have is my sections and then my front page. But it would be nice if maybe I could visually arrange that in a way where I had more control.
Right. Cool. Is there or are there any tools or resources that you're currently using that you find really helpful that you want to share?
Yeah, and I love this question whenever I listen to the podcast because the whole time I'm listening to the podcast, I'm like, okay, I gotta check this out. I have like a little journal. I don't have a lot of tools in the way of like apps and certain things. But I do have a few things that kind of seem obvious to me, but they might not be. So the Sell on Etsy app and the regular Etsy app, I have both. I use them both. They're amazing. The Sell on Etsy app is wonderful for selling in person. I've got my little card swiper.
Oh yeah.
They take 2.75% and then no fees, so it's actually a little bit cheaper than PayPal.
Yeah.
Which is wonderful. A couple other tools I use, and this is another thing that kind of seems obvious, but if you're shipping, I feel like shipping is like people dread it. Right? Like there's this whole thing around getting started. Oh, I gotta ship stuff. Shipping for me is the easiest thing in the world. And I'm so happy. And the reason is because I use the shipping labels feature. And there was a seller you had on recently who wasn't doing that. And I was like, girl, you need to do that. Like you have to. It's you buy them on eBay, the shipping labels, and you never fill out another custom form again, and it's the easiest thing, and it's cheap, and there's no excuse. Printers are so cheap.
Wait, Bree, you mean the not pre-printed shipping labels, but the blank shipping labels that you just feed into your printer?
Yes.
The ones that are self-adhesive?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yes. So not only printing, but using and because when I started out, I was like, well, that seems expensive and complicated. No, it's very easy, and I didn't wait too long before I did it, but when I hear about sellers that still aren't doing it, I'm like, you need to do this. Like, it's amazing. You just go print your labels, they print out, you slap them on. And so the other thing I use is poly mailers, which are the white plastic bags. If you just look up poly mailers on eBay, they're super cheap. You just throw your clothes in. If they're more delicate, I bubble wrap them, and then you slap your sticker on, and shipping for me is never a hassle. So I'm really good about getting things out within 3 days. Most of my stuff ships within 1 or 2, and most people get their item within 3 to 5. Oh, cool. So it's a really important aspect of online sales. Like if you're going to dread it, then get over that part, because it really, this is another fascinating thing is I get people message me and they say, well, I need something by, December 20th. Can you make sure I get it by then? And I'm just like, wait a minute, that's 6 weeks out. Of course, but that's not how I write it out. But and then sometimes I hear back, oh, okay, good, because I ordered something a month ago and it still hasn't come, or I just hear these kind of horror stories, and I'm just like, what? Like there's kind of no excuse for it.
Reason,
and if you're overexpending yourself to where you can't do that, it's just a really bad look on you. I have a lot of repeat customers, and I will lose them if I do that. And it also is a way that you're going to get repeat customers. They're like, wow, I ordered something that I loved and I got it in 3 days. Like, I'm going to do that again. So, those are my tools that to me seem obvious, but they're just so important.
I know. You would think that it would just occur to everyone, but I'm glad you mentioned those. The ones you order off eBay, the shipping labels and the poly mailers, do you use any specific brand, or anyone will do?
No, okay. They're both pretty general. I was not familiar with either of those things.
Okay.
And then I went in and
Okay. I, for one, love shipping. I know it's crazy, but I just like prepping things to send out.
Definitely. Well, when I started, if you go back to my early sales, I started with kitschy housewares, and shipping was a nightmare. Oh, sometimes I would have like 7-8 orders to package, and I would have to cut these unique boxes and make sure, and sometimes glass would break, and it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth it for what I was selling it for, but it was a great way to get started because I wanted to build up my Etsy at the beginning, and I had to start small, and that was my way to start small. And I was kind of intimidated with the clothing, so I was like, and I really loved collecting the housewares. I'm really glad I don't do it anymore, but it was a really neat experience at the beginning. But I never have to ship anything that complicated. And I actually took shoes out of my store about 6 months ago. I never had an issue with sizing, and they sold great, but I really didn't like storing them, and I really didn't like shipping them, which I know it doesn't seem that hard. You just throw them in a box.
But
but I just love I wanted to end up just selling clothing. So again, I'm to the point now where I just have to deal with fabric.
Yeah. And it's good because you as a seller, you need to find what, hit your own stride and then just stay in that lane, in the lane that's working for you, and just get good at that.
Find your strength and really go with that and be realistic. I think for me too, that was kind of where I started. I was like, okay, I want to have a store that is my main source of income. I can't sew everything and do that. It's just not going to happen. So that's why vintage was the answer for me in that way. And then it's going to support my creative outlet of designing.
Yeah. Bree, do you have an Etsy shop shout out?
I so do. I would love to shout out to Maggie, who I'm so excited to I think I just owe being at this point to her. Maggie of Brown Cow Vintage. And her shop is also 60s to 90s ready to wear. Her stuff is definitely different than mine, and she's got amazing pieces. I started out, we were both from Milwaukee, and she found me through a friend on Facebook, reached out to me and asked me to model for her.
Oh.
And then so I started modeling for her, and it was amazing because I was working towards my Etsy shop. I was selling housewares at the time, but I had a lot of intimidation around, I was just really nervous of like, okay, what if somebody buys something and it doesn't fit right, and just all of this mystery that she unraveled for me. So when I sit here and talk about tagging stuff, when I mentioned to you poly mailers, when I mentioned to you shipping labels, that's all Maggie.
Oh.
So I give her so much credit. She's amazing. She works with a lot of Milwaukee models, a lot of women in the fashion scene there, and so through her I've met a lot of wonderful people, and she's just fantastic, and her store is amazing, and I would love if you went and supported and liked her, and I do owe a lot to her. We kind of consider if you go to her shop too, you're going to find me because I've modeled for her a lot through the years,
nice.
And I go back every summer to Milwaukee, and then we work together. So yeah, and then I also did her I was doing her mending for any vintage pieces that needed any work. So we always had this moneyless professional exchange that worked out so wonderful. So moving away was really, really hard in that regard.
Oh.
But she's kind of my sister shop. So yeah, Brown Cow Vintage.
Okay, very good. Brown Cow Vintage. I will have a link to Maggie's shop. Please go and check her out. Check out Brown Cow Vintage.
Wonderful.
Tell her Bree sent you. If you see anything you like in there, leave a note. Tell her Bree sent you to her. Now, Bree, what's the best way people can get in touch with you if they want to reach out to you or have any questions about selling vintage or just want to talk to you?
Anyone who has any questions or anything at all, feel free to reach out to me, because that's one thing I'm trying to work on is I was really good at networking in a real sense, in real person when I had my shop, and it's been a bit harder for me to get into that online, and I'm to a point now where I'm like, I'm ready. Like, let's meet. Let's collaborate. I'm always available to model or to style or anything at all.
Very
so through Etsy is great. My email is gingerandjudy@gmail.com.
Okay.
And then Instagram, it's @gingerandjudy. And if you Google Ginger and Judy, you're going to find me. It's since I'm on all the outlets, you'll find me. So yeah, even through the website works too. And I really invite anybody to reach out to me if you've got questions, if you're getting started, if you're just like, hey, I'm kind of doing what you're doing. I think it's, if you're in the Austin area, definitely, I would love that.
Okay, fantastic. I will have links to everywhere that Bree is. Her Etsy shop, again, it's Ginger and Judy. And I also have links to both her websites, breerose.com, which is bree-rose.com, and gingerandjudy.com. And her email as well, and Instagram, she's @gingerandjudy. I like it when people think of a name so unique and early enough that they can just capture it everywhere.
Definitely.
I missed that boat, so good for you. Bree, thank you so much for being my guest and for answering all my million questions about vintage and selling vintage stuff. I've really enjoyed learning from you, and I know there's a lot more to learn, but thank you for being so generous with the information you shared.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I feel like I could go on forever. This is what I enjoy. And thank you so much for this podcast. Is like, it's like exactly what I was looking for.
Oh,
So
thank you.
it's just I'm so excited that it exists, and just keep rocking it. You're amazing.
Thank you, Bree. I appreciate that. And I thank you for listening to the podcast. I will be back again next week.
Thank you for listening. You can subscribe to the podcast in iTunes, and while you're there, please leave a review too. Visit convome.com to leave a comment or feedback on this episode.